we took 70% of our logos and we moved them to this pool. It was challenging, and it still is challenging. And in retrospect, we should have really gone back to the acquisition stage and really understood what types of customers are we bringing in? What is the lead source? How do they go through the funnel of engagement? And then how do we make sure that the handoff and the expectations set in the sales process is consistent instead of a broken experience?
Welcome to Customer on Success, the podcast where we cut out the noise and talk with real leaders about their hardest lessons in customer success and other go-to-market motions. I'm your host, Joe DeGrande, and in each episode, we're going to unpack real challenges from real leaders. Failed tech implementations, a strategy that didn't yield results, or difficult customers. But more importantly, we're going to take those lessons learned and share them with you so that way you can avoid those same mistakes with your team. So if you're in customer success, sales, or other go-to-market motions, stick around to hear from the best. Now let's dig into it. In this episode of Customer on Success, I talk with Madelyn DePrey. She's the Global VP of Customer Success at Aircall, and she pulls back the curtain on Aircall's shift to a digital CS motion, moving a huge SMB segment from named CSMs to a pooled proactive model. And what went sideways when expectations set by sales, it didn't match the post-sales reality. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you do too. Now let's dive in. So let's kick this off. Let's do it. Awesome. So Madelyn, thank you so much for coming on the Customer on Success podcast.
Thank you, Joe. It's great to be here. And I love talking about unsuccessful aspects of my career and my life. So I'm really humbled and honored to have some therapy together. Let's do this.
Yeah, definitely. Like almost like they're starting to become like the therapy sessions, and they're very humbling. And also, for the audience, if you're not familiar with Madelyn, she's the Global VP of Customer Success at Aircall. But yeah, I think when it comes to these stories, right, like we all got them, right? I think that's the main thing. And especially considering, I always mention this quite a bit about, hey, like we never went for school for customer success or post sales. And to be honest with you, I still don't think you can, right? I think there's obviously tons of resources out there, but I guess it's always trial and error as far as what I found out, and you're kind of learning from the best. But, I know today we're talking a lot about digital CS or tech touch, scaled CS. And I know, which is one of my favorite topics, obviously, but I'm always curious to hear the challenges there because it's still very prevalent. Obviously, AI is getting thrown in the mix. And I do feel that a lot of people are intimidated by it as well. So it's always good to hear the stories and challenges that come with it. But I guess tell me what's going on as far as your experience, doing it at Aircall.
Sure. Thanks, Joe. I think, full transparency, we're still figuring it out. So I'm not here to tell you a wrapped up story with a bow about how we solved all our problems. It's a work in progress. And quite frankly, it absolutely should be a work in progress, because guess what? Your customer needs are a work in progress. The world we live in is a work in progress, the economy. So
yes.
We're still figuring it out. So and again, thanks for the opportunity to chat about it. So a little bit of context. So I'm at Aircall.
Sure.
We're a communications platform. We lead with AI, so an excellent tool to help be the voice for your sales and support teams, but also very much with AI at the center of empowering better communications. And so Aircall, we're largely an SMB business. I've got a global team here. We're a company that's based all over the world, and that's candidly my favorite part of my job. But that means that our customers are all over the world, and for the most part, we serve the small SMBs. We help the little guys act like big, successful, complex organizations with our tools. And in terms of digital success and our transformation, about a year and a half ago, we kind of looked at our spend and as most companies did, wanted to become more efficient. And I looked at within our base, about 70% of our customers are sub 10 seats. So we're talking sub 3K ACV, small accounts who tend to, have a lot of needs, because while they're small, we are, and maybe what they spend seems, small in terms of our total P&L. It's a big amount on their budget line, and so it's important that we can cater to their needs, even though they're there are a bunch of them, and maybe small in the individual level in our base, we're a big spend for them. And so, of that small segment, which is 70% of our logos, nice. We made a decision to pretty abruptly change course pretty effectively in terms of how we serve these customers. So these customers historically needed a named CSM. They needed a human-led onboarding experience, and that was great. And that was sort of a differentiator and a superpower. And we wanted to, we looked at the fact that we had, a level of a coverage that wasn't optimal. And the team was reactive, and we were catering to these customers' needs. Mostly the loudest customers got the most, and we needed to take a step back and really shift to be able to support them at scale. And so we decided to pivot from having a named CSM model to putting these customers into a pool of CSMs. And so we developed a digital customer success strategy, and I had to do a lot of internal education about what that is. And I have to say, I love the customer success community because you can talk to so many folks within the business and get ideas. And I learned so much from what other companies were doing. And we established a digital customer success team and a strategy. So primarily we took existing CSMs, we sold them on this new role, which was going to be less of you have a bunch of customers and you're responsible for all of them, and more of you're part of a team supporting these customers proactively at scale, and we're going to make sure that these customers get what they need in a way that's going to feel like a lot more care because we'll be more proactive and leverage automations, but your role is going to change a little bit. So we took these customers, we moved them into a pool, and we focused on proactive motions. So leveraging customer journey mapping, doing outbounding, emails, Gainsight PX for in-product communication, and making sure we were looking at both adoption triggers in the product, but also time-based triggers. So what stage of the journey they're at, and engaging with these customers at scale, but not saying, hey, I'm your named CSM, here's my phone number and give me a call, but rather saying, here's a way to get in touch with us. A team of people are here to support you, right?
Sure.
We made this change. So we took 70% of our logos and we moved them to this pool. We have a new team and a new way of operating. And it was challenging, and it still is challenging. And I think the reason that one of the key challenges that I can kind of look back upon that we could have done better is, or opportunities is, we sort of took the customer journey and we changed it pretty radically, starting after signature. So after that initial signature. And in retrospect, what we should have done is we should have really gone back to the acquisition stage at the top of the funnel and really understood what types of customers are we bringing in? What is the lead source? How do they go through the funnel of engagement? And then how do we make sure that the handoff and the expectation set in the sales process is consistent instead of a broken experience? Because Joe, our sales team was still having to offer a pretty high touch experience to transition these accounts. And then it felt pretty broken when it came into the post-sales experience. And so that's where we had to really change course. And I'll pause there. I said a lot, but that's kind of what I want to geek out with you about today.
100%. No, I love this. It's really interesting because you brought up a very touchy word, at least from my perspective, is the rapid change. I think a lot of people actually, they go in there and they think, hey, I'm just going to implement a bunch of stuff and just turn it on and flick a switch. And unfortunately, again, goes back to what you were saying, if they already have these expectations that they've experienced prior, even sometimes I've seen teams where they're migrating people into this post-sales model after the fact, as opposed to just from the new business side. They're already used to it. So now you're going from one end of the spectrum to the other. That's a pretty big change. So I'm curious though, on that new business piece, right? So when we're talking about how it should start at, the top of the funnel, tell me more about that and what you mean.
Sure. So, and by the way, I do roll up into go-to-market. So I sit in a go-to-market org, and my team does own upsell, expansion, and renewal. Nice. And so, especially more upmarket. So we're talking about digital, but more upmarket. I sit in these meetings with my sales counterparts, and I feel like that's actually a superpower that I, as a CS leader, have developed a deeper understanding of the customer acquisition and the science of sales and how we can apply that successfully to post-sales. And so what I mean in this context is when customers come to us, when however they find us or however we find them, that is their initial impression. And it's so important that whatever that looks like, whatever their draw is, why they're looking for a phone system, why they're looking for a voice AI, whatever they're needing, that expectation that we're setting in the very initial kind of insight stage, and whether it's outbounding or inbounding of leads, whatever that is, that needs to inform everything we do. From getting them to sign a contract, to getting them through a trial, to then being a customer and retaining. And I think the more we go back to that very, very early stage, a lot of CS and sales leaders focus on the handoff, the handshake from I sold a contract to CS. You need to go even earlier than that. And you need to understand how customers come into your funnel and how they become customers and what that looks like, the channels they come from, and the expectations they have. And so specifically, they come through, they're engaging with our marketing resources, they're maybe even talking to SDRs or BDRs, whatever that looks like, or leveraging a free trial experience. And then there's a salesperson that comes into play that might be guiding them in a very high touch way through that trial period, which is what we were doing. We were getting on a call, we were actually configuring the system for them, having multiple follow-up and touch points. Even though they're smaller accounts, we were still putting a lot of effort into that stage of the funnel to make sure they converted, because we don't want to risk any drop in conversion, which is great. But one, is that sustainable for the size of accounts we're talking about? And two, let's make sure that whatever expectation we set, we can uphold throughout the journey. And so this is where we've had to kind of change course. And my sales counterparts are fully on board with this. Of course, we want to be spending more time on the larger accounts, or understanding of these smaller accounts. How much do they really need? And how can we make them feel super valued, but do it in a scalable way? And so that's what we've done. We've kind of gone back and we've realigned as an entire organization on what is the experience from that very early insight stage to moving through the sales process to trialing the product, and how do we set an expectation that they're going to get what they need to be successful, but do that at scale. And in terms of what I mentioned, where we still had to have sales individuals reaching out and engaging with smaller accounts to make sure that the trial successfully converted, that is such an indicator that something is not working in a product-led way to make the trial conversion possible without human intervention. And actually, that's a lot of what we're doing in the digital side to make sure that they can figure out how to manage themselves, and we can do webinar content and one-to-many. But we also have to do that in the sales process. And if they're not converting successfully through a trial, that is such a strong indication that they're not going to be successful after they trial and once they're a customer. And so now we've gone back in heavy partnership with the product team. We've looked at every single behavior point. What do they need? Why did they come to us? What are the 3 things that they need to do in order to successfully convert and move from a free trial to a paid subscription? And then how do we make sure that we reemphasize that value throughout the customer journey? And that's the very thing we're doing. So it's kind of fun. It's things like, in the trial, can we ask them questions like what they're looking for, what their use case is? We do that in an automated way instead of having someone call them, and embed that into their entire customer journey and back to kind of what are their success metrics? Why did they come to us? And how do we reiterate on that? So that's the shift that we've been undertaking over the last several months.
I love it. It's awesome. And it's actually a really good point, right? Because that sales process, at least it sounds like at the time, or maybe it's still going on, or you're working towards, a better solution going forward, but it is very hands-on. So like once you start to you're also doing that in terms of it's very resource intensive, right? When it comes to people and, teams and so on, but also too, the flip side of it is it has an impact on that customer. It gives them essentially that wrong expectation of like, hey, I'm going to always have this available to me. You brought up a really interesting thing I want to actually dive into a little bit more, is that data piece, right? When it comes to like digital CS, tech touch, scaled CS, whatever everybody's defining it now today, you need data to launch automation, whether that's internal facing, external facing, whether you're prompting up task communications, right? You brought something up that's interesting about like tracking use cases in the beginning of that funnel during the product. I guess like tell me more about that and how you're tracking and like how that helped. I'm just curious.
Yes. So the first thing I'll say is your data house is never going to be fully in order, and don't wait for that to be the case to execute.
Agreed.
Right. So this
Yes.
is something I'm constantly learning and reminding myself of. We could analyze to death and ask for an army of data scientists and yada yada yada. But at the end of the day, what are the insights you have? What are maybe 3 key insights you need to have that you don't have? And then hang your hat on those and try and execute so that you can kind of move the needle and learn and evolve the experience for your customers. So, in terms of your question about kind of what are some of the key data points, well, what we found is when we had a sales led motion, so when there was an actual account executive engaging with the customer, the data hygiene wasn't great.
Mm.
It actually was. So we did a couple things. One, we introduced a self kind of survey type function, so the customer can self acknowledge who they are, their company size, their use case, select from a short drop down of goals. We introduced some of those things into the trial. Now you need to be very careful when you're making any changes to a trial, because especially in SMB, magnitude of scale, any small tweak could have an impact on your growth numbers. And so you have to A/B test. You have to be careful. You can't introduce another stage where there could be drop off, abandoned shopping cart, et cetera. So kind of fun CX stuff that you kind of need to be aware of, especially in a growth motion in terms of trial conversions. So we were cautious and tried to err on the side of simplification. So that's all fine and dandy. But that was we got some of the key indicators that we honestly weren't always as strong when they were written down by an SDR or an AE. So that's good. But that nurture piece is also so important. And what there are so many tools and automations and AI functionality you can use in order to do that. So one of the things we're doing, a very specific data point, is when we think about these smaller accounts, we're trying to kind of separate those that are very much maintenance. They're the SMBs, they're small businesses. We're going to support them. We're going to make them very successful at scale. But then there's also accounts that come in at this size that have a lot of potential. And we're trying to carve those out. And we're calling them high potential or purchasing power accounts. And so we've introduced a lead scoring mechanism, again, kind of taking the science of sales and applying that to post sales, where when customers come in, and we look at a series of criteria. So one, that back to what they might have self-administered in their setup as, I'm a company of this size, or I'm using you for a sales use case, but my support team is using something else. So some of those self-subscribed indicators we leverage. We also use tools like Clay and Apollo for data enrichment to be able to grab insights like company size, number of employees on LinkedIn, the CEO contact information, all of those great nuggets in order to create a lead scoring model that says accounts today in this digital segment are at this stage, but the potential is actually a flag that they have a lot of growth. And so with this enrichment and also the customers giving us this information, now we're able to pull out these high potential accounts and build a model where we can actually put more resources, put more human capital, leverage a success BDR to call into these customers and encourage them to grow and scale with us. And so that's one of the data points that I'm really excited about, that we've been able to make sure that we are leveraging and nurturing.
Love it. I think it's so funny because I bring up Apollo and Clay a couple times, and you're definitely one of the first on the podcast. And I mean, I guarantee we're probably 15 episodes in, but I talk with a lot of leaders, and I'm shocked it's starting to come up more, but you're the first I've actually spoken to, and this has come up. And I think it's so powerful because, you bring up a lot, the science of sales and applying it to CS. And I think a lot of people are, they're starting to see like, hey, to get out of this, this catch-all function, right, and be more revenue focused, you need to take it into account, like the science of sales, right? What are those actual signals that indicates that there's an opportunity for, one, also churn or renewal, depending on what spectrum that you're looking at there, but also to that expansion, right? Is there high growth in employees? Are there leadership changes, right? Like, has your main point of contact left? All those tools can identify that. And then of course, once you have it automated, brought into your systems automatically, and then launching plays on it, that's how you scale. So there's a lot of, go ahead.
And I love that you say that. And again, back to, the benefits of having been part of a go-to-market org. It's controversial, and I actually think we've maybe swayed too far in that direction. We need to get back a little bit to like adoption and gross retention and those really important pieces. But at the same time, I do think a lot of customer success folks have not had the great opportunity to benefit from a deep understanding of all of the motions that have worked at the top of the funnel and in the acquisition stage that we should absolutely be applying to post sales.
Yes.
And honestly, the more as CS leaders, the more time you spend with your sales counterparts and just sit and look at all of the resources we put into acquiring new customers, the better equipped you will be to apply that to post sales across digital, but across all segments. A good example is we buy leads for the sales teams. We physically buy them leads. We have marketing engines that work on this. We also then do campaigns, and then we have BDRs and SDRs, and then we have sellers. So you think of all of those layers that go into acquiring a customer.
Sure.
What if you take a lot of that's working so well and apply that into the expansion motion? And it's not just expansion, it's gross retention as well. Multi-threading is a good example. That is how you save accounts, right? That's a tried and sales tactic. So I could geek out about this all day.
No, I love it. I talk about multi-threading a lot, quite a bit. And it's, I actually got pushed an ad. I can't remember the company, but they said it was, I don't know what they were advertising, but the point is they were interviewing someone at a conference, like, what's the number one reason accounts churn? And they're like, because you're not multi-threaded. And it's so true, because that one champion that might just be like the biggest fan of your product, you don't know what's happening behind the scenes. If they did adequate selling across that org, that's it. It could be deal over. But yeah, I think when it comes down to it, a lot of those same principles and adoption, a lot of those same principles apply, but adoption and like health scoring, right? Sure, is it an element of it, but it's not a full indication of renewal. I've seen in time, I've tons of conversations, even in my own experience, where health score is like just all the way up to the right, but then they just shock you. And then all of a sudden a, 6-figure, 7-figure deal is just churned. So
100%. And like health score, it's kind of arbitrary.
Well, that's
but you know what I mean? Like, it's like what is truly behind the science of that? And what are some of the other indicators?
It kind of goes back to, too, in the beginning, right? When we're talking about like digital CS or just customer success in general, any go-to-market motion, you're always iterating, right? And I think like it's only as good as how quickly you iterate. It's only as good as how well you're actually identifying and listening to your customers' needs, right? I see a lot of companies fall into the trap where they're just dictating a health score based on what, obviously if they're just doing a very quantitative analysis or just what they think is success, just like some companies dictate, hey, what actually is in terms of, their metric for identifying time to value, right? Like how long it took and what is that value metric? But I know we could go on, but I guess like, I'm curious now, kind of going back into, digital customer success space, right? And we're talking about, in the beginning, about, hey, it starts at the beginning of the funnel, right? And understanding that customer experience. I'm curious about like, what were the downstream impacts once you made some of those changes down the line, right? I guess like what were some examples of like, hey, here were some challenges like customers being upset and so on. And then how did that shift as far as like once you start to make those changes?
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing that I already kind of alluded to is the partnering on product strategy. So partnering with your sales team on where are some of the drop-off points, where are some of the early indicators that are going to have a lasting effect on the customer's ability to self-serve and be autonomous in their success in your product. And so by joining forces with the more go-to-market top of funnel acquisition stage, we then were going in double duty on, actually, I know this might be less sexy to build a way for customers to more easily do this thing like onboarding versus building really cool flashy new AI features. But actually, they're not going to get to those features if we don't do this. And so that was one of the biggest benefits was how do we actually partner on product strategy and double down on the ROI of investments in order to not just retain customers, but actually acquire them. And so that was one of the biggest pivotal changes. The other is just expectation setting. And we talk a lot of as CS leaders about you map a customer journey, but you need to map it at the very beginning of the journey because there's a lot of little nuggets of how the customer comes to you or what questions they ask or what they need or how you sell the services you offer that then you can create consistency to throughout the journey. But as we're mapping, we also identified some other friction points like they needed to get in touch with this team, but that was delayed. So how do we go about that? And what did that look like? And how do we work backwards from there? And all of those things. So that was also helpful to kind of identify those friction points that we maybe looked over, that now when we look at the entire journey, they really came to light in a much more meaningful way.
Love it. No, it's actually, it's a good point, right? You could kind of end up in your own silo if you're not working across different stakeholders in the organization, and then you could just totally miss out on all those opportunities. I do, when I talk to people, there's always this constant battle, for lack of a better phrase, of how to navigate those cross-functional relationships. I'm curious as far as like, if you were to tell like the audience now, like what are some tips on how to navigate that? I'm like, what would you tell them? Like as far as navigating between sales and product, if they're dealing with any sort of like roadblocks, so to speak.
You have to get alignment on OKRs and KPIs. Yeah. You have to. And if that is not the case, manage up, right? So the understanding was the business that has been so well done in my organization is we have one growth number, and that growth number comes from both the customers and the net new sales. And that, I know a lot of companies have that constant friction of net new sales versus expansion.
Sure.
We've been good about saying both things are so equally important. And actually, when you look at the scale of what we can do on the expansion side with a base of the size of our customer base versus in, what we can bring in a quarter, maybe it's even greater, right? But you have to kind of create those synergies. And so that's number one. But same thing on the product side, right? I in my career, the most success I've had working with product individuals is making sure we have shared KPIs. So a good example is right now we have a big work stream on improving the customer onboarding experience. It's so critical. And that's got to be very product led. And so guess what? I got with our chief product officer and I said, what is this PM's KPI going to be this quarter on this initiative? Let's agree it's going to be first 6-month retention, right? It's not the first 1 month, it's the first 6 months. So we're creating a lasting stickiness. She's measured on that. She maybe even has a quarterly objective and maybe a quarterly commission tied to that. That's the same as my team's objectives and initiatives and incentives. So now you create that alignment. And so as leaders, as CS leaders, even at the IC level, making sure, one, you understand the KPIs of your counterparts and build empathy on that. So you know how to ask them for things and you can kind of sell to them on when you're creating an ask. But two, that you're advocating for cohesion in those KPIs and OKRs across the organization.
Love it. Yeah, I think it's a really important piece in terms of KPI alignment, or if it's an OKR or whatever it might be, but having kind of everybody bought in on the same metric, or just even rolling up to the overall like macro level of metric that you're working towards is going to be key for success. And then everyone, no one's competing against each other, right? I think like one of the challenges I've seen with a lot of organizations, right? And I'm sure you have seen it too, is new business. It's just sales, sell at all costs just to hit that revenue number. And that could have a downstream impact for your team, right? On customer success post sales, because maybe not the ideal fit customer is coming across your desk, and it could have an impact on those churn numbers.
I mean, I sure hope that that's less and less the case, right? Because you talk to investors, I just got off with a board member this morning.
Sure.
The net retention number is the number, right? And if there is both the net retention, but also the churn, and if they're seeing erosion of churn, that's an indication that you're selling to the wrong ICP. Right. Yes. So I hope that's less and less the case, that there's such friction points. Now, look, we're in SaaS. There's this pressure to show big numbers, and there's funding rounds and all of this. But so of course the friction point's not going away completely. But I think we've made so much progress in terms of how investors and operators and public markets think about the actual success of a business, not just at that one number, but actually the blended true outcome and health of the business. So hopefully that's changing. Yeah,
no, I'm hoping it's changing too. I mean, it's hopefully we can get to a place where it is more settled. But you're 100% right. I think you have those two metrics to work against, right? NRR, net revenue retention, and then kind of if it's renewal rate, GRR, et cetera, to make sure to kind of do a proper evaluation of the book. I mean, thinking back now on the overall, like when we're talking about digital CS, I guess like if we were to kind of wrap it up in the bow in terms of like key takeaways here of like the learning lessons, if it's like, hey, you've done this already now. Yeah, Madelyn, I don't remember you telling me like as far as when it started and the entire journey, but like if you were like telling somebody, hey, like, here are the key takeaways as far as like what to avoid and what I did wrong, like, how would you kind of surmise?
Sure. I would say think holistically about the entire customer journey. Start at the
Yeah.
beginning. Truly, deeply take the time to understand your sales process, because that's when digital needs to start to be successful, and educate those counterparts in the business on what that looks like. So that would be number one. I would say don't go too quickly.
Mm,
Test, iterate. One of the things that we kind of pivoted to is our APAC region is really great about testing and experimenting. And so we actually had them lead the pack in some of the bigger changes so we could learn and document in a smaller market and then bring that globally, right? So that's another key lesson. And then finally, make sure that you don't wait for perfection in terms of data reliability,
yes.
that you execute and you go and you take some risks, but it's a well-contained risk and calculated so that you can roll it back if you have to, I would say.
Yeah.
Those have got to be my advice. Yes.
No, I love it. You're 100% right. I think, yeah, starting small, especially when you're dealing, going back to your book size, around 70% of the logos, that could have a substantial impact, any small change. So you definitely have to be cautious. And then focusing on those testing grounds, I think. So you said you used like a test segment at the APAC market to test out a particular journey.
Yep.
Fantastic. I mean, doing that just could kind of help build a business case of seeing how it could roll out. Obviously, it's less of an impact in terms of if things go wrong. I mean, with automation, any sort of strategy, things can go wrong, and being knowledgeable of that. I guess in terms of now, we're talking about digital CS. We're talking about customer success as a whole. I'm curious where, again, my experience is all just experience, right? I was just kind of thrown into it, just learning and as I go. But I'm curious, as far as like your background, is there anything that you recommend like people checking out? You mentioned communities and earlier people within the network, but are there any particular books or courses? I'm always curious to hear what people are like, learning other than like traditional education.
I love that question, and I always take notes when I listen to that at the end of podcasts. So I'm so glad you asked. So I am a huge podcast consumer. I take the subway. I live in New York City, and I run every morning, and the podcasts are always in my ears. So my favorite is Grit, which is Kleiner Perkins, and it brings in leaders and talks about not just their biggest triumphs, but also, just like you, some of their mistakes and learnings, both in their personal and professional life. And I have found it to be a very human look at the complexity of being leaders, and I could not recommend it more. It's an hour or so a week. Grit, Kleiner Perkins. The other thing I would say from a book perspective is I'm going to go back to a really old favorite. So with the rise of AI, we're doing so much automation, and honestly, it's what we sell at Aircall, and it's great. But that human touch is still so important, and I would argue it's much more important than ever after COVID and with AI. And I come from hospitality, so before I was in tech, I was in hospitality. And there's Danny Meyer, who's the founder of Shake Shack. Before that, he founded some of the best restaurants in New York City, and he wrote a book called Setting the Table, which is about bringing the art of hospitality into the workspace. And as a customer success leader, I encourage my team, even though we are SMB and we're doing things at scale, to take a step back and really bring that art of anticipating your needs of your customers, being service oriented, and going above and beyond in certain time in order to serve the needs of your customers. So that's what Danny Meyer wrote about in Setting the Table. Couldn't recommend it more.
That's awesome. I actually love that because I'm actually kind of a foodie myself, and I like going out, and I have a couple of friends in like the industry. We always talk about like the synergies of like the work I do, like in CS, and we do. And then like the restaurant industry, when it comes down to expectation setting. I actually talked to him recently about how expectation setting from the beginning, right? Like if you have like a new customer coming in and you give this grand old experience, right? Like you have the table ready, like the bottle of wine that, already set at the table and so on. But then he mentioned kind of similar what we're talking about in digital CS, right? Okay, well, how is that individual's experience going to be the next time? And then the next time and down the road. And then what does that look like, for retention, right? If there's any sort of slip up, because again, you're setting a bar pretty high. What happens? Is that customer going to churn? Are they going to go somewhere else? So I like that. I'm going to have to, and that was Danny Meyer.
Danny Meyer. I love that. Yep. And my husband's been in the restaurant industry for 25 years in New York City. And while we're in such different fields and he's never opened a MacBook, his stories and what he brings home are so similar to what we navigate in customer success. So it's really true. I love that you said that. Absolutely.
100%. And I think also too, like it comes down to people, right? I think like people, when they talk about customer, right? It's just like a definition of, the person that you're working with at a company, they purchase a product, but in reality, it is an individual. It's a person, right? They're people. And that's why there's so much synergy. I always like reminding people of that because, sometimes, and I have to remind myself, you get caught up in it and you don't realize that you're talking to people and trying to figure out what makes people tick, as well, in terms of getting the problem solved. So
absolutely.
Love it. Good stuff. And then I guess Madelyn, to wrap things up, like where can everybody find you and learn more?
Thanks. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn like we all are. so Madelyn DePrey on LinkedIn. But I'm in New York. We've got an office in New York. We've got offices all over the world too. So love connecting with global SaaS community. And again, it's such an honor to be here. But yes, I've LinkedIn. Like you can find me at Aircall as well. Yes, such a pleasure. Thank you, Joe.
Awesome. No, absolutely love it. We'll definitely put all of that in the show notes. Thanks so much for coming on, Madelyn. I really appreciate this conversation.
Thanks for doing this good work. It's so important. Really, really enjoy your content. So
absolutely.
Thanks,
thank you. That's a wrap for today's episode. Thanks so much for listening. If you got some value from this conversation, hit subscribe, leave a rating or review, and share it with someone who's also out there trying to build a better customer success or go-to-market strategy, even if it's messy along the way. And if you want more frameworks, tools, automated playbooks, check out jodostechtouch.com and subscribe to our newsletter. That link is in the description. Thanks so much for being here. Keep building, keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next one. Quick note before we wrap, this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. The ideas and opinions shared here are of my own or those of my guests, and don't reflect the views of any current or former employers, clients, or partners. We might reference tools, platforms, or companies, but nothing shared here should be taken as fact, endorsement, or criticism. Do your own research and always consult your team or legal counsel when making any business decisions. This content is not legal, financial, or business advice. It's just us sharing what's worked, what hasn't, and how we've learned from both.